Hi.
Greetings. We're at the end of Genesis chapter 18, verse 33. We're doing most of 19 as well. I'm doing the reading today from the ESV because Vivian's eyes aren't very good today. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we'll spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly so that they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you. Do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he's become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one, and my life will be saved?" He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar, which means little. God destroys Sodom is the subtitle of the next few verses. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew these cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived.
I guess with the reading, the first thing that occurred to me when we were reading it is how horrifying we would be at this thought that Lot would offer his daughters. I think most people are pretty horrified when they read that. But I think he was not behaving any differently than most people of the day would. This doesn't justify it, but it does tell you that this was common. It was typical of the day. They were Canaanites. They too were Canaanites in a lot of their thinking, in the way they did things. So although we would be horrified, we also were horrified at things Abraham did, like almost victimizing his wife in order to save his own skin. Let her be taken by the Pharaoh, and he knew what would happen, that he was going to take her as a wife. So that's horrifying too. So it's not on the basis of good behavior that God is rescuing, saving.
Mm-hmm. And even later we know Abraham offers up his son. Mm-hmm. Again, something that we find beyond belief. Mm-hmm. But it's quite in keeping with the religious viewpoint of the people
of that
time and that place.
Mm-hmm.
Again, God, of course, doesn't take Isaac's life. Mm-hmm. But the very fact that Abraham is willing at that late stage in his life, after all the promises have finally been fulfilled, to do that.
And God rescues those daughters and the wife and Lot.
Yeah.
And would rescue more.
Would, yeah, but obviously that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking too of the transition in the nouns that are used here. Mm-hmm. We don't notice it, but in verse 19:1, this is the first time in the Bible angels is used in the plural. Mm-hmm. 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. In the previous chapter where they're introduced, we have 3 men, mm-hmm. one of whom turns out to be Yahweh. Mm-hmm. And he has already gone his way, according to 1833. Right? He's gone his way. Mm-hmm. But the angels are mentioned by that title in verse 1, and again in verse 15. But in between we see that the men of Sodom see them just as men.
Even Lot just sees them as men, you think. I mean, he does bow down to them, but perhaps they looked like
noblemen?
Noblemen or something, yeah.
Traveling noblemen, yeah.
But he thinks he has to protect them, so I don't think he thought they were angels, but just strangers.
He doesn't seem to realize who they are until they do this tremendous feat of blinding the men assaulting the house.
Yeah.
And when you get to verse 12, I think the astounding thing that you have to think about if you're coming from a witness background is, on what basis are these people being offered salvation?
Yeah. I mean, when the angels talk to Lot, they ask him, do you have other relatives or people in the city? And, you know, they aren't saying, because we know these are good guys back out there. And he goes and talks to them. They don't seem to take him seriously, the father, Lot.
The sons-in-law are certainly not reverent. They're not even respectful of Lot here.
Yeah. But they would have been saved if they'd gone with them.
Yeah.
So it's not based on what they're doing. So I think you have to see that there's another reason why they're all being saved out of this situation. 4
are finally saved. But why are they saved?
I think the last verse tells you why.
That's verse 29?
Yeah. Or is it 29 or 20?
God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow.
Yeah. He remembers Abraham. So it's on the basis of the covenant promise that God made to Abraham that these people are being saved. It's not because they're such wonderful people.
Well, we know the wife, for one, is looking back affectionately at Sodom. And she's lost after she's saved.
Even Lot hesitates to leave.
And we know later what the daughters do.
Yeah.
So no, it's got nothing to do with their covenant faithfulness to God.
Yeah, one of the verses says the Lord was merciful to them. So it is a mercy. I think too of the passage in Corinthians where it says that your husband and your children are holy on the basis of you being a believer. Like this, this concept too is one that we don't think about very often. How does that work? Especially if you're a witness, how does that work? Why would they be holy when you think everything is based on you personally, what you're doing.
So outstandingly so here in chapter 19, we have an example of how the whole book of Genesis, the theme of it is all of grace.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason having to do with our personal righteousness that Lot and his family are rescued out of the city.
Yeah.
It's all because of promises and commitments that God has made already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And verse 24, I don't think we can leave that without comment. The Lord rained, that is, Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah, sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Mm-hmm. Well, we've done a whole video on that, which we'll link at the end, dealing with how the Watchtowers dealt with it and even retranslated it in their Silver Sword.
Yeah.
And before that, before we link, though, we'll read what Griffith Thomas and H.C. Leupold have had to say about this passage. Also, Rabbi Gunter Plaut.
Okay, I think I can read this. There are lives recorded in the Bible which have well been called beacons. There are men like Balaam, Saul, and Solomon who started well, with every possible advantage, and then closed their careers in failure and disaster. Such a life was that of Lot, the nephew of Abraham. He came out of Mesopotamia with his uncle and continued with him in Canaan until their possessions necessitated a separation. He thereupon pitched his tent toward Sodom, but soon entered and abode in the city. As a consequence, he was involved in its captivity by the kings of the east. That was in chapter 14. Even his rescue by Abraham did not suffice to warn him from the place, for he returned and lived there as before. There is scarcely a life recorded in Scripture which is fuller of serious and solemn instruction for every believer. And just another comment here. Now he's jumped to when he's speaking to his son-in-laws. He says, "But he seemed as one that mocked. His testimony had no power. He had lived too long as one of themselves, without any very real difference, to allow of his message being of any avail. When the testimony of the life does not agree with the testimony of the lips, the latter always goes unheeded. It is the life that is the true light." Well, that's very good. I think that's very telling.
Again, there's a lesson for us coming out of a cult, which is Lot doesn't lose his relationship with God or his relationship with the divine community, Abraham's family. He's not part of the family because he's not living the way they live. Mm-hmm. But he has lost his testimony, as Griffith Thomas says. His effectiveness as a witness to God has been lost, but the relationship is intact because of promises, the commitments that God made.
I think, too, there's a lesson for us when we think of church people. There are lots of lots.
Lots of lots.
In the church.
Yeah.
And there are some Abrahams. But even Abraham wasn't spotless. Even Abraham had his faults. So the expectation of perfection, mm-hmm. or a people that are squeaky clean is just not realistic.
Mm. Here's Rabbi Gunter Plaut on what was the sin of Sodom. He says the sin of Sodom consisted not only in what its people did, as here, but in what they failed to do. Mm. So there's where you see Lot's righteousness compared to them. He's obviously very hospitable and very kind to strangers. Mm-hmm. Thus, no one raised his voice in protest when the crowd molested Lot's guests. Failure to protest is to participate in the sin of a community. The idea of community guilt, obviously very strong.
Yeah, they obviously felt he was somewhat different than them because they said, "You've come here and you think you're the judge." Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in the New Testament, of course, Lot is called a righteous man, and that's what's a little confusing to us if we're thinking like Jehovah's Witnesses. He's righteous only because God is still in a relationship with him, not mm-hmm. because of his personal righteousness. Mm-hmm. Here's H.C. Leupold on this passage. We believe that the mere expression God or Yahweh rained from heaven would have served very adequately to convey such an emphatic statement. But in this instance, Yahweh was present in and with his angels whom he had delegated to this task and who acted under specific divine mandate. He who the day before been visibly present with them, walked with Abraham and the angels, was now invisibly with them. When his agents acted, he acted. Consequently, we believe that the view which the church held on this problem from days of old is still the simplest and the best. God the Son brought down the rain from God the Father, as the Council of Sirmium worded the statement. Martin Luther says this expression indicates two persons in the Godhead. And though I wouldn't tend to be that dogmatic, especially with people who believe something different, I would have to say that at the very least here you have to concede that the people who believe this have a very strong point, that the message of this passage, particularly verse 24, is that God is everywhere.
And a witness reading that has to think it's a very odd way of saying it. The Lord rained down from the Lord. You know, how do you make sense of that? The church is trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. So we'll link the video that we did very early in our Genesis series. We did the first 15 or so videos were on the subject of things that really shocked us or surprised us when we first left the Watchtower and read Genesis without our Watchtower glasses. This was one of the passages that really hit us all hard. Combined, of course, with chapter 18, the three men eating with Abraham.
So I think it's called Sodom. Yahweh rains down fire from Yahweh.
So we'll link that one.
And the playlist, the Genesis.
And the Genesis playlist.
Okay.
See you next time.